We work across all faculties, all operational units, and across the whole organisation of the university, using and generating evidence to support healthy people, to build healthy places, develop healthy policies and implement healthy practices. Today is our third Healthy Sydney University seminar for this year. Our seminars are actually a really great opportunity for people across the university and community from different walks of lives to come together and share their knowledge, and we'll certainly be receiving international knowledge today about creating healthy environments and communities. In April, we had Professor Sue Powell from Manchester Metropolitan University from the UK share her research findings on the health of university students. And our other seminar this year was two speakers from Alfred Health in Victoria who shared expertise and findings on changes they've made around the food environment in their environment and enabling students, staff and visitors to make healthier food choices. Today, the focus area is on mental wellbeing, which can't really be separated from physical wellbeing. Equally as important, equally as co-joined. Poor mental health itself, so as well as enhancing mental wellbeing, one of the key call-outs for mental wellbeing for staff and students, poor mental health itself is a leading cause, or in fact I think the WHO have recently, as in this year, said that depression is the leading cause of ill health and disability around the world for many people, and that absolutely includes young people. Poor social, emotional and mental wellbeing can affect young people's capacity to thrive and affect their ability to contribute to their communities, and particularly from my angle, I take a great interest in how we're producing a good learning environment for students who then move on into the workplace, who in turn take healthy attributes with them into the workplace to further lead healthy workplaces. We know that university students in particular are affected, with Australian and UK research suggesting that mental ill health is common. Poor mental health affects students' academic progress and, as importantly, enjoyment and enrichment of their time whilst at university, which those of us who might be in the same generation as me know passes way too quickly, although it doesn't feel like it at the time. So today we're delighted to have Rosie Tressler speak with us. Rosie is the CEO of Student Minds UK and works as an advocate for young people's mental health and wellbeing. We were actually talking earlier today about already out in the workplace how she notices how young students look and all the things that they've got yet to experience. Rosie's been working on the issue of student wellbeing for several years, first as the Equal Opportunities and Welfare Officer at the University of Nottingham Students' Union, followed by a number of different roles at Student Minds UK, including managing the volunteering campaigns, which they themselves are complex things to manage, and then becoming the charity's Chief Executive Officer in 2015. Rosie and the Student Minds UK team have worked with over 100 universities and student unions to develop and deliver peer support, student campaign groups, training schemes, as well as working on national initiatives such as the UK's Universities Mental Health Day. Rosie's travel and to be here with us in Australia today and previously in Victoria is supported by our Winston Churchill Memorial Trust Fellowship, which is focused on preventive mental health interventions for young people. So please, welcome Rosie.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. It's such an honour to be here, and I really appreciate colleagues at the university and Ellie, who has set all of this up for doing so, because it's quite daunting actually, making this journey, saying I'm going to go and try and work out what's going on in student mental health globally, and so it's been very nice to have such a warm welcome and support. As was stated, I'm here thanks to a Winston Churchill Memorial Trust Fellowship. And for anyone who hasn't come across the organisation before, they're very much about trying to get organisations, individuals, academics to look beyond the boundaries of their own countries, learn from how people are tackling things abroad. And I think considering that we've just had Brexit in the UK, which has just really knocked us all back, I think it's even more important that we have those ties and really learn from each other. I'm also very aware, as somebody who studied history, that I don't want to fall into the trap of being a Brit that goes to another country and starts lecturing on how something should be done. So I'm going to try and avoid that. And really what I want to do is just share with you some reflections and some learning from the work that we've been doing across the UK. And I really also should be saying that I'm here to learn. I want to spend some time at the end of this really hearing some reflections from you about how you're kind of responding to this narrative around student mental health at the moment. And I think there's so much that I can learn from what's going on in Australia, not least the reports that came out from Origin and Headspace around university mental health recently, and also a fellow, Winston Churchill Memorial Trust fellow that studied at Sydney, Ben Vaness, who did an excellent report looking at what else we can learn from globally as well. So hoping to build a little bit on that. So a little bit about why I guess I got involved in student mental health. I think it's always nice to hear a bit about what is it that's driving people, why is it that I love working in a small but ambitious student mental health charity. So I came into this much more from a campaigns angle. So I am not somebody who has a clinical background that has worked in psychology. I've come at this from the social justice perspective, having been involved with women's campaigning issues. I was very passionate about LGBTQ plus activism. I worked in a students' union, I've been involved with university committees, but now I'm very much involved with that kind of delivery and thinking about how do we create that strategic change across the UK in this area. And I'm really driven by the experiences that I've had of speaking with young people. I'm also very motivated by personal experience in this area and through family and friends. So it really does mean a lot to me to see so many people here that are really passionate about how we do support young people as well as we can. Yeah, so a little bit about what's been going on with this trip. So I have had the luxury of visiting colleagues across parts of Canada, in Halifax, Montreal, Toronto, and then I've just spent a couple of weeks in Melbourne, and now my final week is in Sydney, so hopefully I've saved the best for last. I don't know, yeah. So in terms of the Student Minds team, we are based in Oxford in the UK, and for anyone who's been to Oxford, who hasn't been to Oxford, it's quite a quaint place. A lot of the buildings actually remind me of some of the old sort of college buildings that you've got here. And last night I had the slightly unusual experience of dining at the all-men's college here, St. Paul's, which I wasn't quite prepared for. Yeah, I'm seeing some faces right now thinking, that must have been interesting. So I was very grateful for that opportunity, but it felt very similar to the sort of culture, sort of environment that we have in Oxford with the collegiate system. Very interesting. And people were very lovely and forthcoming about talking about these issues, which was great to see. So we have a small team based there in Oxford. We are a staff team of 9.5, not half a person, but one person who's part-time. And we work with over 100 universities across the UK. So that is quite a challenge for us. The UK is obviously a lot smaller than Australia. So I was saying to Ellie before how having to just go up to St Andrews took several hours for me, and I was, that was quite a horrendous journey, but I know that you guys travel from all over, so I should stop whinging about that. And we are very much volunteer-led, so the reason why we've got that reach is we're very lucky. We have a lot of a huge volunteer base, hundreds of students that get involved with our work. So going on, what I wanted to do is just tell you what is the general stuff that we're trying to do at Student Minds. So we are working to empower students and the university community to develop skills, knowledge and confidence, look after their own mental health, support others and create change. so that all in higher education can thrive. So that language around thriving is very deliberate. When we started as a charity, we started running peer support groups for students with eating disorders, and really we have broadened our approach over the years, and we are very much recognising that we need to be thinking about the well-being of all students, the health of all students, which I know is something that is really thought about within the strategy of Sydney University as well. So I'll just move this way a little bit. So in terms of our focus as an organisation, we are very focused on wanting all members of the university community to have health literacy. We want peer support to be widely available to students, both at a formal and informal level, and I'll talk about some of those in a little while. And seeing that as an addition to professional-led services, I think it's very important that we recognise we are working in times when pressures are being felt across health services globally, and we need to be really careful how certain interventions are pitched and being clear on what they are there to do and what they're not there to do. We also want to equip students to prove the state of university mental health on their campuses so that they have an advocacy role in that. And for all connected organisations to recognise student mental health as a strategic priority. So some of our work can be quite simple. We work with a lot of different people in the space, but one organisation we did some training for was UCAS, and they manage all applications to universities in the UK. And so we did simply some training with their phone line team, because they hadn't had that experience before of recognising actually when they get calls from students that are stressed about their exams. We've had a lot of issues with that in the last few weeks because our whole grading system has changed, which is creating obviously a lot of pressure on young people. They want to be equipped to know how to talk to people about what support's available to them when they arrive. So that's our focus, and what I want to do really in this seminar, I should also say a little bit about how we work, sorry. So we do, as I say, we work very collaboratively. We are guided very much by students with lived experience as well as professionals that have expertise, and very much underpinned by research. So the chair of our trustee board is an academic psychologist at King's College London. So we try to collaborate where we can with academics to ensure that we're getting a better understanding of what's going on in student mental health, and we're not making assumptions about why things are as they are. So what I want to do is a very potted summary of student mental health in the UK, and the lessons that we've learned from our peer support work. We've made lots of mistakes along the way. I think we have to all be able to talk really openly about those. And thinking about how we involve students in service development as well. So you can see my focus is very much on that kind of youth engagement piece. And then starting to think about what next. So what are the challenges that we're grappling with in the UK? What are the challenges that I'm thinking about in this Churchill Fellowship? And I have to write a report up at the end of this trip. So I want to really throw some of this out to you and hear your reflections on some of these key queries. So in terms of what's going on in student mental health at the moment in the UK, I think it's not a million miles away from the experience in Canadian universities, in Australian universities, that there is a lot of narrative about there being a crisis in student mental health or in youth mental health more generally. And I think this presents quite a challenge sort of from a charity that's focused on this issue of how we respond to that, because we do acknowledge that services are under pressure and that there are new challenges facing young people, but we also have to be really careful in how we talk about this idea of there being a crisis, and is that actually helpful for young people to be talked to about their increased vulnerability, when actually me and Ellie were discussing earlier that young people are doing a fantastic job of navigating the challenges that they're presented with. They do demonstrate high resilience against some of these things. So I think there is a lot of this narrative in the media. We know though that students are increasingly accessing support. So we were involved with some research by the Funding Council for Higher Education in the UK, and they really were looking at there being over 150% increase in 5 years in the number of students accessing their support services. So it's not just a narrative. There is very much that pressure, but I think sometimes we have to be a bit careful about some of the data that we're pushing out around this. And it's probably something that we're all frustrated by is that we get this sort of narrative going on about students as snowflakes and all of this stuff, which is really unfair and really winds me up. So we can get into some Twitter debates about that. So yeah, this is very much the picture, but what we have had in the UK, which is great, is there has been a lot of action on this. There has been a real drive at a policy level from government, but also from Universities UK, who are the membership body for university vice-chancellors, to recognise that we need to be have a more of a structure, more of a framework around how universities should support student mental health. So what I wanted to do was to tell you a bit more about what our understanding is of what's going on in student mental health in the UK specifically, and some of the key themes that have come through in research projects that we've done. I think we recognise there's lots of factors that feed into student mental health. I'm not going to be able to go through all of them. I've not got time to talk at length about the sort of socio-economic things that underpin this, which are really crucial. But what I wanted to do is share, what things have students told us that they find particularly challenging in relation to their mental health, and also what have university staff told us. So the first thing putting out there is about poor transitions. So that being both going into university and coming out. So we did a study looking at the experience of students with eating difficulties in making the transition into university, and really saw that there was not a lot to support that continuity of keeping your support systems going. There's obviously a lot of difficulties that are to do with that transition. You're moving away from all of your friends, your family, having to build up from scratch. And there are some really good things being done in the UK to try and support that transition. I was hearing about one university, a very simple intervention where they were just sending all students before they arrived the same book, so that when they arrived they had something to talk about, which sounds very simple, but something that allows people to feel really early on that they are building relationships with others. But also the transition out of university, I think this is something we've only just started to recognise. We did a study with over 300 young people that were in the first 3 years of work, and again seeing that they didn't really feel that equipped and supported by the institution to go into the workplace. There is lots of brilliant work that goes on in career services, but often the students that might really benefit from that support of thinking about their career choices aren't being reached by some of this work. So how can we make sure that students make best transitions into workplace, and can ultimately then, when they go into their workplaces, feel equipped to really challenge some of the practices that might not be supportive to well-being in certain employers. Accessibility and coordination of support is a big theme that comes through in several research projects, not just that Student Minds have done, but across the sector. So we do know that there are still many students that they might go for support, but then the actual getting things joined up, sharing information is falling down, and professionals definitely tell us that coordination support just doesn't happen quick enough. I know we're very lucky in the UK with the national health system that we have, but I think we recognise that mental health, and particularly youth mental health, it's often referred to as the Cinderella service, because it has had less funding and support over time. The next issue that I wanted to pick up was stigma, because I think a lot of people talk about young people as being really happy talking about mental health, and I think there's certainly more literacy, and I think young people have a language to talk about these things in ways that previous generations might not. But I think to say that stigma doesn't exist for that population, I think is wrong. I think we know, again, we ask students what they think the biggest challenges are for student mental health, and in our Grand Challenges study, the fear of being judged came out as the top challenge. So there was over 100 different challenges that we actually pulled out in that study, which you can get on our website, but the fear of being judged was the top one. So, we can talk about all these other things to do with services, but there is something very much about that culture and helping students to think about how do they relate to other students on these issues. Connected to that is thinking about support for the supporters. So we're really passionate at Student Minds about the role that housemates, course mates play in supporting others. And we did a study, it was quite a small qualitative study with about 80 students, which was looking at a student's experience of supporting a friend, and unsurprisingly, it's challenging. If you have a housemate, you know, and I've had this experience with different people that I live with when I was a student, if you have a husband that is really struggling with their well-being and you haven't, you know, had the, you don't know how to respond to that, you haven't been given the opportunity to think about how you respond, and you're not aware of the services as well, and that has a toll on your well-being as well. And we found with that study that supporters were often the primary source of social support to that student. So we can talk about boundaries and we can say to students, don't get so involved with your housemate, but that is very hard to do when you are living with somebody that you care about and that you want to help. So more work to be done there. And then finally, a big bit of work that we did over the last couple of years was looking at student accommodation. So in the UK, we have quite a lot, we have a real mixture of student accommodation, and I won't talk too much today about the cost of living, but that is a big factor here. But there's something here around with accommodation, thinking about how are cleaners, porters, security staff, they are often the front line for these issues. And what we found with a pilot study we did at Nottingham Trent University was that staff really felt that they were really dealing with the difficult end of these issues, and they hadn't really been equipped to do so, and there needed to be a bit more in place in terms of policy to support that. So they are kind of some of the key things that have come up for us in our study. But as I say, there's much more to student mental health than this. And another key part of our understanding of what's going on in student mental health is thinking about who are all the key players on each university campus and how do students access this support. And what we really find, and I'm learning a bit more about how things work in Australia, but what we really find in the UK is that there is quite a bit available to students, but the way that it's often structured and the way that they operate are often quite in silos, and that means that it creates gaps that students can fall down. So they might be able to go and access support from a mental health advisor. In the UK, this has been a role which has really grown over the last few years, and it's somebody that would support students to get adjustments for their course, maybe do some one-to-one work. So really important role, and can be really key to a student being able to, you know, get the support they need and thrive in higher education. But they might not then be connected in with the support that's available through the Students' Union. And so it is, I think a lot of universities would appreciate that there's some brilliant work going on, but it's often not all joined up, and there isn't that kind of strategic oversight. So what we're involved with at the moment is a national programme with Universities UK, the membership body I mentioned for Vice-Chancellors, and lots of other different relevant partners to think about what a whole university approach to wellbeing looks like, and what is the vision, what is it we're trying to achieve here with our universities. This isn't just about saying that, you know, on the one hand, it's very important that we make sure that students are not discriminated against, that have pre-existing mental health difficulties, that they have really good opportunities and have the support they need. That's really important. But it's also about thinking about the whole culture of an institution and how are we setting students up. So lots of things will be encompassed in that. This isn't the framework, this is just some of the themes that we've been speaking with the group about. But that will be coming out in September, early September, for anyone who's interested. But what we mean when we're thinking about a whole university approach to mental health is thinking about good transition support, both in and out, but also those termly transition points that happen. Having responses to some of the key things that we know affect student life and their ability to thrive. The impact of social media, sleep, physical activity. Some of the best evidence that we have in mental health is for physical activity, and how that is, you know, has such a good impact on people's mental health. So how do we embed some of this? Accommodation, I've mentioned. The impact on learning, so again, not seeing support as separate to learning and thinking about how do we get things embedded in the curriculum. And it's really interesting to hear earlier from Ellie about some of the work that's been going on with the medical school here around that. some of the work that we've seen in the UK at Derby University, which we think is really exciting, is where they have been building these relationships with the different departments. So for example, working with the gaming course that there is at Derby and getting the students there to think about, okay, you've got a deadline for a game in 2 weeks. How are you going to make sure that you can manage your well-being with the stress of that happening? So making it really relevant, making it stealthy, not this being a bolt-on, but actually really embedded in the learning experience. Having a variety of research-led interventions is the next one. So what that means to us is very much still investing in and supporting the existing student support that's available, like university counselling, mental health advisors, but also thinking about the fact that different students are going to need different things. For some students, they want someone to listen to them there and then in that moment and to make them aware of adjustments that can be made. For others, they do need more of an ongoing intervention. So I think we're encouraging the institutions to think about this as a kind of multidisciplinary approach. Student engagement, and that's what the focus is going to be for me for the next 5 minutes, so I'll come back to that. And then finally, developing resilience, a very loaded term, but we do know that there are some things some general life skills work that can be protective for mental health. And we just have to be really careful that we don't communicate this in the wrong way, as if it's people need to be more resilient. That's not helpful. That doesn't appreciate everything that's going on in this space. So we need to be really careful that this is about this only works alongside thinking about the structural things that are influencing it as well. And I think what we also think is really key in developing that strategic whole university approach to mental health is also about the link up, how we're actually working. So I know a big thing that was made, which was mentioned in the Origin report and Ben's report as well, was about we've got such expertise on university campuses in mental health. You've got tons of academics that are, pushing through amazing studies all the time, but quite often this doesn't make it into the practice and on the campuses through the student services teams, because we've all got our heads down, we're all super busy, but could we get more of that to build capacity and to support student services to evaluate and to make sure that we do have that link up between practice, teaching and research. And that will mean that re-establishing some of the existing boundaries that exist between some of those. So the big thing that we think is key in this is also about student engagement. So what student engagement means to different people is interesting. So we are really trying to encourage this to see young people as partners in responding to student mental health, and not seeing it as something that we need to do things to students, thinking about how we can work with them. So to us, student engagement is a few different things. So at the top, it's structured peer support programs. So that might be, for example, a support group, or it might be a buddy scheme through a department. Tailored approach for specific communities and roles. So we know that certain roles, like sports team committees, might benefit from doing some specific targeted work with them, but also communities that face additional challenges or discrimination in their experiences. So that could be looking to work with LGBTQ plus student society to think about particular barriers that might exist for different groups. And then finally, activities across the whole student population that builds that health literacy and ensures that students can have a voice in their institution's strategy. So what I'm going to do is just got 3 quick slides just to run you through what we're doing in each of those areas. So first of all, student-led structured peer support. As I said at the start, we started out as a charity based on support for students experiencing eating difficulties, as well as that programme where a couple of students will facilitate a support group, and then any students that identify as experiencing difficulties with food can come along to that group. And it's really about setting up a safe framework where students can share, learn from each other, and there's a lot of support that then goes behind that in terms of supervision for the volunteers after every session, a detailed training scheme, and ongoing project management support and training as well. We also have a programme called Positive Minds, which involves delivering a course. It's a 6-week course where students think about the different things that can be contributing to low mood. So there's a whole week where we look at social support. There's other weeks where we look at physical activity, food, and what we try and do with that course really is helping students to think about strategies that they are going to embed into their everyday life at university to manage episodes of low mood. And it involves students setting goals each week, so implementation intentions that they can then reflect on each week about, okay, how have I got on this week? Last week I said I was going to go for a coffee with a friend. Did I do it? What were the challenges? You know, some of these things. And it's quite a cognitive behavioural therapy based programme as well. So with that course and with the work that we do with eating difficulties, we've worked with both students with lived experience but also professionals with a background in this. So we've worked with a university counsellor with a CBT background who wrote a website about depression on our depression course. We worked with a eating disorder specialist in the UK for our eating difficulties work. And with those programs, we do see good improvements. So with our Positive Minds, we look at the change in students' quality of life, their help seeking, their ability to speak about mental health with others, and we see significant improvements in that work. But we're always trying to learn, we're always trying to ask students for feedback. Is this working? What should we be changing? And they've given us the best feedback about, actually, the way you've worded that is really off-putting. Can you just change this? So I think there's something here about really authentically co-producing with students and getting their engagement. We've also just started to try a bit more in terms of buddy schemes. I know universities have a long history of doing buddying and mentoring schemes, but I think we recognise that some of these can be quite underutilised and they could do with a bit of structure and support sometimes to be effective. So we're trialling now something with KCL. We're training up a couple of buddies to be responsible then for a group of 5 or 6 first year students, so a couple of older students, but being really careful here to not put too much on the individual students to take on. And there are, I think, several things to think about with thinking about making peer support safe. So some of it is about having a really clear recovery-focused framework. We spend a lot of time working with young people about ground rules for sessions. There are certain topics that will not be helpful for people to sit and ruminate about. We know that the evidence is there, so we set up a structure around that. And making sure that the students are really confident then about enforcing ground rules if they need to. Really clear confidentiality policies so that students know what would be shared and what wouldn't. We have different frameworks for the different courses we run. So for our Positive Minds group, students actually bring their GP details. It's still an anonymous group. We don't keep any of their information, but they it's if we ever did need to extend confidentiality because there was risk to that individual or somebody else, there is a mechanism in which students can do that. Really clear referral signposting system. So the only way this works is if it's working really closely with the staff that work in student services. When we started out as a charity, we were a bit more going off, okay, here's some enthusiastic students, we'll set this project up. And I think now we really appreciate that the only way this works if it is very collaborative. It's really embedded as part of the triage system that exists within the university's student services. Really detailed recruitment processes. So we do a lot to try and make sure that the students that are volunteering with us, that it's the right time for them to be doing it, that they feel that this is they've got enough support in place to make this happen, and also that they have the characteristics and they've developed the skills that we need in a young person to take on this kind of role. We do a really comprehensive training program with them over a long weekend, getting them up to scratch with skills, listening skills, motivational interviewing skills, but then everything they need to then be responsible and lead a student project on their campus. And then, yeah, it's about the sustainability. So the volunteer management stuff, I think there is a lot to be said for the fact we have quite recent graduates that act as the main contact for these groups. They're very relatable then and they can share their experiences of what it was like to be involved with student projects. Weekly supervision I've mentioned, so again we think it's really important that anyone taking on these kind of roles that they have good support to debrief after sessions. And again, a couple of things about it being student facing is the promotion. Our student volunteers come up with fantastic ways to engage other students. They've created some brilliant videos and publicity, and we've also made sure that the impact monitoring aspect of this work is really easy for the students to implement. But it takes a bit of patience. So what I would say is for anyone exploring peer support, student peer support, I think these sort of things don't start working overnight. They take time, especially if you're working with volunteers that are going to change over every year. So we always sort of say, that it will take a bit of time, and so it's really important to be transparent about the learning as you go. So, two other areas that I'm going to mention of our work. So the first one is about workshops that we run for supporters. So we run a Look After Your Mate training program. We also run training for university sports teams. And what we're trying to do there is really short 3-hour workshops where we're just starting that health literacy around mental health and getting them to think about what would you do if you were worried about somebody else in the lacrosse team. How would you nudge somebody along a cycle for change and help them to think about maybe accessing some support or speaking to somebody else. I think in terms of getting that culture shift across an institution, students are talking to each other about mental health, whether people like it or not. They are talking about it, they are supporting each other, and so from our perspective we think let's think about how we support the fact that that is already naturally occurring, peer support, and think about how we keep that kind of safe and manageable for individuals that are getting quite engaged. And strengthening those existing networks. But the way that we deliver this program is a staff-led program. So we train up staff that already have a background in student wellbeing, that are working in the university. We also train up university sports staff because we feel that they're good role models for the sports teams to be engaged with, and they roll those out. And then finally, the campaigning and advocacy work. So this is really our network of student campaign groups. So students that have set up a student society with their students' union that want to run events, some speaker events. They will also organise things like one-off yoga workshops. It's really a range of things. And we support them with central resources and materials that they can use, because I think it's trying to strike that balance between student groups each year not having to reinvent the wheel, but also allowing for that creativity that makes it fresh and interesting, because student cohorts have changed. Even from when I was a student, the way that our volunteers now want to interact with us is completely different to even 4 or 5 years ago. So I think keeping students involved in that. A lot of our groups get involved with University Mental Health Day, which we coordinate with the University's Mental Health Advisor Network in the UK. And we have a student-run blog, which is students sharing their own experiences, and that is one of the most popular things that we do. We see it as quite a low-level programme for ourselves in terms of capacity, but that is where we get the big hits. Students want to read about the experiences of other students. And finally, we have a team of press ambassadors, so students that we've done some training with to think about what are more positive messages that we want to hear about student mental health in the media, and how can they use their experiences to influence others at a national scale. So all of that, again, is supported by a training program for our campaigners, so that they can think about what is the space like and where can they make a difference. Which leads me on to my final point that I want to make, which is about how students can go from the raising awareness activities and activities to decrease stigma, increase help seeking, which is important, but it's not the whole picture. How can we take them from that to really be involved in creating long-lasting change on their campuses? And what we've done is, through this work with UUK, is had students that we've worked with to really set a vision for higher education and mental health in the UK. What is it that they think should underpin it? And they get it. They are amazing and really inspiring, have great ideas. And we are building on this model. We're trying to think about how can more universities really create really genuine ways for students to be involved with policy making. So it's not just a one-off workshop, it's actually thinking about how do you embed that culture. We work with students to do problem-solving booths where students run that. It's a posh way of saying quick surveying. Also, we've created a student voice forum where we've created some activities so that they can share their experiences in a safe way and then think about creative ideation techniques where they come up with lots of ideas that their university can take on. So this is models that we're still developing, but we've seen potential. The university where we piloted this at Birmingham University, they wanted to know from students what do they think of their new building, which is just launched. They thought the students knew what it was, and when we did the problem-solving booths, they really had no clue. They didn't know what it was all about, and they gave some really good feedback to the university, which they could then take on board. So that is a bit about us and the programs that we're running. The final image I'm just leaving you with is when I was thinking about some of the key learning from our work, I was sat in Halifax Library in Canada, and this is an amazing building that has so much community engagement. And when they started the project, no one wanted a library, but they did really fantastic engagement events with the community, really starting from the bottom, asking the different members of the community, what did they want from a library? What did an engaging community space look like to them? And I think for me, that's a kind of enduring image for how we want to be approaching student mental health. So to leave you with kind of our questions, what we're pondering, these are the things that we're thinking about. So how do we get prevention right? Is it helpful to talk about resilience? How can we get that balance between evidence-led and youth-led? Because sometimes they're compatible, sometimes there's some different ideas there. Are targeted interventions for different groups beneficial, helpful? So BAME stands for Black and Minority Ethnic students, so we know that there is attainment gaps and for different students in the UK. Is there some work to be done there? Should our children's mental health services in the UK go up to 25? You've obviously got this prolific Headspace programme, and we don't have the same setup in the UK, so I'm pondering on that. And then thinking about what the most successful levers are for change. So are we on the right track? Should we be doing something different? And I would really welcome anyone who wants to chat more to me, either after this or in the future. That's my email address. I'd really love to hear your ideas. And I think we've only got a little bit of time for some questions now. So if we don't get onto anything, please do feel free to grab me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, Rosie. I have a substantive role in the area of research education or research students, in particular PhD students. Do you have any insights into the specific needs and issues and interventions that might be appropriate for our PhD students? To give you some context, mental health is a significant issue for PhD students at this institution. And there are some specific issues in particular around isolation of students, working independently and not being part of groups and those sorts of things. And so we've been trialling a number of different interventions to try and address those issues, but we're grateful for your input if you have any insights into that.
Yeah, thank you. No, so important. So there have been... there's been some research in the UK looking at PhD students, but I do think they have been largely quite ignored. So it's great to hear that you're doing something there. I think something that we've seen when we have been approached by PhD students that want to do work with us, the pressure that often their supervisors are feeling means that the supervisor feels quite limited in how much they can then provide support to their students. So I think this is also part of like the wider wellbeing strategy for staff. I focus on the students there, but what I really should also say is that we think that the only way that it works with doing this work with students is if we really also prioritise the staff of staff's mental health as well. So I think if we can get that right as well, then staff should have a bit more capacity and feel equipped to respond if one of their PhD students is struggling. There has been some good work. There was some, I think it was either Bristol or Brighton University, I've forgotten which one it was now, where they did do some dedicated wellbeing initiatives just for PhD students. So recognising that a lot of PhD students think that what the general work that their university is doing isn't responding to them, and the messaging is a bit off. But I always go back to saying, starting with speaking to the students themselves. So I think if you're already working with a pool of PhD students, I'm sure that they've got really good insight into what would make a difference. And a lot of the time I do think it is some of that peer-to-peer, PhD students being able to speak to other students and recognise, actually, do you know what, we're all worried that we're not going to finish our PhDs and they're really bloody hard. So yeah, a few of those things, but I'd be happy to keep chatting on that one. It's really good. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rosie. I'm Tanya Willis from ANU, Australian National University, sorry. We have a massive peer program at ANU already, particularly in our residential halls, and one of the big problems that we have, and it came up very clearly as part of the Human Rights Commission report recently on sexual assault in universities, is the boundary issue with our peers. Have you got any... We've been doing a lot of training with them for many, many years, and we still haven't quite got that right. Do you have any sort of ideas around how we can be better at that and really making sure that they aren't going around the boundaries? It's actually affecting their mental health as leaders, and that's what we're very concerned about.
Yeah, definitely. I do think it's really difficult. Where does the boundaries end? A lot in our training, when we're talking about being a peer support facilitator, it is quite a boundaried situation because they only provide support in the sessions at those times. They are not to take on responsibility outside of that. So I think it's quite a unique setup. Where we're doing the buddy scheme, the boundaries issue I think is a bit more challenging because you're saying, here's a couple of students and you can speak to them about general things that come up on your course. And so I think, again, in the training, it's very important to have students really talk about what they think are the appropriate boundaries, when would things to start becoming a worry to them, make sure that they're accessing support. So what kind of supervision are they getting if they're taking on this role? Because I think that helps. In supervision, the supervisor will quite quickly pick up if a student is going above and beyond what they were really meant to be doing and have that conversation with them. I think a lot of it also ties to student wellbeing policies. So for all of our programs, we've developed some really comprehensive sort of 40-page document which talks about how do we support the well-being of our volunteers, and some of that is related to boundaries, but I think it's just making sure that with any of this work you really have to think about all the worst case scenarios and how you would manage those. So I mean, I'm not really answering your question there, but yeah.
Do you have a ratio of supervisor to peers, student peers?
Okay, so for our structured peer support programs, our group work, the supervisor would be responsible for a team of 6, but they rotate, so it's quite a small ratio, I guess.
That's helpful.
Okay. But again, let's keep talking because I think people are still working this out. And it was brilliant when I was in Canada. I found out about a range of university peer programs that I didn't know existed. And I think there's something here about following on from my report. I want to try and support staff that are interested in this to share that good practice, and so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yeah. Does anyone? Yeah. Go.
Hi, my name's Bridget. I'm an undergraduate student here, and I just wanted to touch on the challenge of having like an institution that's so large. It's like 50,000 students, it almost seems like I've been involved with some things in the SRC. There's some good casework services in the SRC. I work with a housing cooperative and we have some good services there, but it's almost as if it's like a gigantic city and all these different mechanisms. They don't know about each other, they don't know how to refer things on, and also it does feel like, student initiatives, there are these initiatives, but there's such a disconnect between that and the next stage or institutional support. And I was wondering if you, obviously you've worked with some really large institutions and what different methods they have to integrate the response and the tackling of that on every level.
Yeah, very fantastic question. I think actually I was hearing a bit about how it works here at Sydney. I think there's something about it, the fact that you've even got a health committee is brilliant, and so many universities in the UK do not have these things set up. So having that whole university-wide committee with all the right people being brought together so that in theory things are joined up, I think that's a really good step. I think having a dedicated strategic lead for mental health and wellbeing in the university as well, so not just thinking about student services, head of student services, which is obviously a completely crucial role to managing all of that, but also looking at it from the population health level, which is also something I know that you do have here in Sydney. I think the other university I've seen where there is less people falling through the gaps, I think it is where the wellbeing teams have really made those connections with the faculties, so are really going out there, getting to know the staff, having champions in the different faculties as well that take a lead. Some of those things. I'm just trying to think what else has helped. I do think part of what we're doing with the UUK programme that we're involved with as well is supporting universities to do an audit of their existing provision and then to develop a whole university-wide mental health strategy, which again, only a few universities in the UK have actually gone through that whole process, and I think it takes quite a long time to do a really thorough audit of especially to isolate it, because mental health links to everything else, so it's very hard to do. But I think doing an audit, developing a strategy, co-producing that with students, I think these are some of the things to really try and see that organisational change. I know there's lots of ways of doing these things, but they're some of the things that stand out for me. Yeah.
Just to, I guess, continue on, my name's Amy, I'm an undergrad student here. With nursing and midwifery medicine, as I'm sure you've heard earlier on that across Australia there's been a spike in suicides. And one thing that, we focus on debriefing in nursing. Is there any student-led groups that you guys have done that are specific to health disciplines, and are there things within those that you found that help students more so in that other than debriefing? Okay, yeah.
So I think on that issue, I think we know that suicide is so complex, and I think unfortunately we still don't know enough. Actually, we just had some big announcements in the UK about increasing mental health research funding, which is great, but we still don't know a lot about what's behind that. And I think it does mean that sometimes some of the solutions that are being put forward are kind of bandages to say, right, we'll try this, but it's so complex. In terms of dedicated work with particular groups of students, there's been some good work in the UK through the GMC, so the Medical Council, where they created a whole guidance package for medical schools about how they should be supporting the well-being of medics, which again has been taken up to varying degrees. But I think you're right, any students that are in more of that caring role or are also working in the health system, so in the UK we have midwives and nurses that they're studying, but they are pretty much most of the time they are spending in hospitals. I think there is more work to be done to support those students, and I know that there was some interesting work done with Tony Jorm here in Australia, in Melbourne. I know that they did a review of doing things like mental health first aid training for nurses as part of that picture. So there's some interesting things there, but I also think it is Probably what we need to change is how much we are expecting young medical professionals to how long the hours that they are expected to work are, because we know that it's just not healthy to expect someone to work for 20 hours. So, you know, I think it's a bit of, some of that is training, some of that is tackling some of those pressures as well. But yeah, I'll get told off for being too political and ranty about all of this, but yeah, it's a good question. Does anyone have anything else that they wanted to share, or maybe you should grab me afterwards? Do we need to wrap up now? Yeah.
What I might do is, we have hit 2 o'clock, so if you need to leave, thank you for being here today. Please help me thank Rosie now for today's talk. Rosie will also be with us tomorrow at our mental wellbeing working group, so if any members of that or others would like to come along and listen a bit further and hear what goes on there, you're very welcome to attend there. That's at the Charles Perkins Centre. And I just, a reminder for all people here today too, we've got another event coming up on the 5th of December in this place as well, where we're actually looking at an integrated approach to teaching health and wellbeing for students as part of their early undergraduate careers. So we'll be looking at a module that we're developing that will become part and infused through undergraduate education. So please do come along on the 5th. Thank you, Rosie. That's a great talk today. Very interesting points. And I think Rosie will be around for a little while longer if you want to talk to her.